Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're returning. I am here today with my fall reads / spooky season reads for you. This was something that I was asking around a little bit, seeing what you guys would like to see most from me next, and this was definitely the #1 video that you wanted. I get it, as everybody is shifting into the best season of the year, fall, spooky season, Halloween season. You kind of want to get together some of the best reads to get into for this fall, and so I've kind of put together a very little list. It's just my 5 favorite horror stories. Now, there are definitely other books that I think could count for spooky season that are more in the thriller genre, and so not necessarily as scary or as straight horror as this list is, but these 5 are just going to be my favorite horror books that I definitely think are worth a read this fall. So number 5 on this list today is The Haunting of Gillespie House by Darcy Coates. Now, I know she's an author that not everybody is completely into. She writes more young adult feeling fiction. Sometimes it feels more middle grade. Now, Gillespie House for me was something that I really enjoyed. It did not feel overly juvenile. It was pretty creepy. It did have a bit of a young adult reader feel to it just because that is her style. But overall, I felt that it was a very enjoyable book to read. It was definitely creepy. It wasn't necessarily one of the best written books that I have ever read. It wasn't completely, poetic in its writing, I don't think, but that's what I enjoy about her stories, is they are written in a very simplistic type of language, which is something that I often really enjoy, especially with horror, because horror can be really scary because the descriptions are so crazy and they're just so deep and creepy and spooky. And also, I think it can be creepy and spooky and deep, even if the language is very simple, because sometimes the scariest things are put very simply to us. It doesn't have to be totally gory and disgusting and super poetic how it's written. It can just be something that is super creepy, just a really creepy concept. And I think that that is where Darcy Coates shines, is she's very, very good at coming up with very creepy concepts for her stories. And that's kind of what draws me into her books, is she's very good at brainstorming the ideas and then putting them onto the page. It's just very interesting to see where her mind goes with all of these ideas. So that is my number 5 book. If you like young adult, then I would definitely recommend it. If you're more just into regular adult fiction, regular horror stories that are made more for a mature audience, then this isn't necessarily the story for you. But if you like young adult and you like horror, I would definitely choose The Haunting of Gillespie House. At number 4, we have Such Pretty Flowers by K.L. Sarah. Now, this is a story that I hate to admit I did choose because I really liked the cover. I thought the cover was beautiful, and then I read the description after that, and I thought it sounded super spooky, super creepy, and so I decided to pick that up from the library. I am an avid library user. I cannot afford to buy every single book that I read, so I did get that one from the library, and it was one of those that was on the new reads shelf, so it was very easy to see right there, and I picked it up, and I'm so happy I did. That was definitely one of the spookier, more mind-bending stories I've read. So it's not as straight up where it's just, here's what's happening, here's what's happening. It's more psychological horror, I guess you would say, and it's a thriller at the same time. So kind of psychological thriller horror story, which I personally really liked. I thought it was great. I liked the way that the characters were woven together. I thought that every character was really unique and interesting to read about, and every chapter kind of made me want more. Now, there were certain parts of it that I didn't think were totally necessary to the story. There was some that was just kind of long-winded. that I was thinking, okay, when is this going to end, you know? But overall, I thought it was a pretty good story. It was definitely very creepy. And my favorite thing about it is that I've never read a book that was exactly like it before. It definitely had a different kind of theme to it that I don't see in stories a whole lot, and just a different feel overall. I think it was super creative, and that's really what I look for most in a story. Is it creative and does it draw me in? Because those are the two main things that are going to keep me reading a story in the long run. So I was really happy that the answers to both of those questions were definitely yes. Now, number 3 is a very classic one that you guys might have even read before. It is Dracula. Dracula. It is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I am a huge, huge fan of this book. I thought it was super creepy, super scary, everything I was hoping it would be. And I have obviously watched movies before based on the story, watched TV based on the story. I mean, hasn't everybody? Before actually reading the book. And on the one hand, I like that I did that, but on the other hand, I think it would have been cool to go in not necessarily knowing the entire story, but that's pretty much impossible living in the 2023 world because there is so much based on Dracula. So taking it from the standpoint of everybody knows Dracula's story, I think that it was still a fantastic book to read because knowing the story doesn't really tell you the whole thing still, because there are so many little bits of the book that you're just never going to know based on all of the shows and movies and everything that have been made kind of in its honor to depict Dracula in a different way. You're never going to know the whole story until you read that book. And so I think for any horror fan who really wants to get back to the roots of what makes a scary story, like where did all of this come from? And horror is such a popular genre today. So it's very interesting to look back at where did all of it come from? Where did it stem from? What was the popular horror that came before modern horror? So if you're one of those people who likes to look back at where did all of this stuff I'm a fan of kind of come from, then definitely if you like spooky stories, if you like scary stuff, I would 100% recommend reading that book. It's a little lengthy, a little bit. It's not terrible, just a little bit. But I would say overall it's so worth reading that I really didn't care that it was kind of long because it was just so interesting. And I feel like I really have a better appreciation of all of the vampire-y stuff we have today because that is really where it came from. And I'm glad that I read that story now. So, for number 2, this is kind of a different one because I'm not actually done reading this book yet, but I was so anxious to record this video, and I had 5 stories, not including this one, and I'm about 75% of the way through, and I thought I have to include this. I have to make room for it. So we're just kind of pushing out the other story that I was going to put in, and we're adding in this current read I have because 75% of the way through, it is absolutely spectacular and one of the spookiest, scariest, best stories I've ever read in my life. So, Grady Hendrix, definitely a popular author. I have tried his books before. I was not a huge fan. I read Horror Store, which is the one that's based on IKEA. I read that because I love IKEA, so of course I want to read it, and the setup of the book is so creative and cool. And so I read that one, really wanted to like it. I did not. I thought it was okay. It wasn't like on my list of bad books. It was just something that I didn't enjoy, that I probably wouldn't have decided to pick up another book by Grady Hendrix had I not seen this particular book. So I'm currently reading How to Sell a Haunted House, which I believe came out this year or last year. It was very recent, I know. And I really, really am liking this one. It is scary while not just being every single page as gore, if you know what I mean. It's not just disgusting, it's more like there's a psychological component. If you can't tell, I'm really into psychological thrillers and psychological horror. That is my absolute favorite genre, I think, is anything that messes with your head a little bit. So I would say How to Sell a Haunted House is less of the icky horror and more of the mind-bending horror. So, not to say icky horror isn't fun. I do love the Halloween movies. I love Halloween Kills. So, please don't come at me saying that I don't love a good bit of gory fun. I do. I definitely do. It's just with the books I read, I like them to be a little more like messing with your mind. So, How to Sell a Haunted House. I will not spoil it. I never spoil books for you guys, as you know. How to Sell a Haunted House is super, super creepy. It deals with, I will tell you this, it deals with puppets, like puppets you put on your hand and talk with, which is one of the scariest things in the world without being scary, if you ask me. I'm just generally terrified of puppets. I'm terrified of dolls. Like, I will not watch Chucky, Annabelle, like any of that kind of stuff. That is just way too scary for me. So reading this book, I was like, ugh, once I realized that it was going to be all about puppets, I was like, oh, ick, ick, ick. But it's so scary that I actually cannot stop reading it. What it feels like to me is kind of if you made now I cannot remember the names of these, the books, the Goosebumps books with Slappy in them. If you made that, but for a mature audience, like for adults, not like mature, like if you made that, but an adult fiction book, I think that is the best description I can come up with for it. It's just very, very surreal and very creepy, but it also feels like it hits a little too close to home for someone who's scared of dolls and puppets and like anything that looks even remotely like it's supposed to be realistic, but it's inanimate. All of that creeps me out. So this was probably one of the scarier books I've ever read, and it's also one of my favorites because I was really looking for something to just super creep me out. This is not the type where you can't go to sleep after reading it. I definitely was okay going to sleep. I was just like, I'll tuck all of my limbs into like under my sheets, and then I will like bundle myself up and I will lay there and I will shut my eyes really tight and hope that this doll doesn't come get me. But I could go to sleep after it, which is a good thing. Sometimes books keep me up, and while it's fun reading something that creepy, it's also kind of like annoying being that scared of something. So it's definitely not to the scary point for me where I couldn't go to sleep. I could go to sleep, I would just lay in bed and be like, oh my goodness, I'm really scared right now. Like that thing could creep up on me. And then I go to sleep. So that's kind of my feeling on this story. I haven't finished it yet. I'm super excited to finish it. At the about 75% mark where I am now, there was just a huge twist, which I really like. That's another one of my favorite components of stories. That's why I read thrillers so much. And so to have a horror story that keeps having these twists is really fun for me because it's kind of like horror and thriller mixed together. So this is kind of the perfect book for me. I'm really glad I picked it up. I'm definitely recommending this to anybody who likes something spooky. Like 100% read this. Even if you're scared of dolls, even if you're scared of puppets, this is definitely the story for you. It is so, so cool. Now, moving on to my number one off of this list, my absolute favorite horror story, which I will never, ever stop recommending to people. I read it this year. I can't believe I waited until I was 23 years old to read it, but if I had read it sooner, I might have been scarred for life. So I don't know, maybe it was good I waited until I was 23 to read it. But my number one story, number one horror story is It by Stephen King. Very basic, I know, but I promise it is so, so good. It is really not even within the horror genre, within every single genre. It is one of the best stories I have ever read in my entire life. It was so exciting and so scary, and I was so attached to all of the characters I was reading about in it. And it was one of those where I know it's a gazillion pages long, but seriously, once I started reading it, like I couldn't stop. So I had it in regular book form and I also had it in audiobook form. And so I would lay in bed and read it as a regular paper book, and then I would be like, okay, should maybe get up, move around a little, not just like lay in bed all day. And so I would turn on the audiobook, go for a walk, come back home, sit down and read the physical book. Like I really could not stop myself from reading it. It was a very, very odd experience because sometimes I'll get that way where I feel like I'll get to the end of a chapter, and every single time I get to the end of a chapter in a book, I'm like, ooh, I gotta read the next chapter. I'm actually reading another one like that right now, other than the haunted house one. I have a thriller that's like that. But with it, there is just something about it, a very odd quality about it, where it's almost like you feel addicted to it and you cannot stop reading it. At least that's what it was for me. After I finished it, I felt super hollow, like I needed to read it again right away, and I needed something to follow up, just like, I don't know, another story with all of the characters, because the characters, how they are in the movies, if you've watched the newer It movies, how the characters are crafted where you really care about all of them, that is how they were written in the story, how they're very easy to get attached to. That is exactly pulled from the pages, that quality about them, which I really liked. I did watch the movies before reading this book, and I don't think it hindered my experience at all. If anything, I think it made it better because I was so prepared for certain parts of it, and other parts of the story just made more sense when I was reading them, because there are parts that are a little bit confusing, that are kind of deep and psychological and confusing. Psychological again. And so reading the book after watching the movies, I think some of it just made a little bit more sense to me in a way. So overall for me, this was really my number one horror story that I would recommend to you. Absolutely one of my favorite books ever in pretty much every sense. So this is definitely something that it's going to take a lot of dedication to sit down and read it, because it is a really, really long story, but I would recommend doing the audiobook. The audiobook is fantastic. I just went onto the Libby app and looked it up, and that is definitely worth it to use the audiobook for that if you are a fan of audiobooks. So that is just in every sense really my number one recommendation for spooky season, Halloween, fall reads. 100% I would say read It by Stephen King. So this has been my kind of roundup of spooky books for the fall. I also want to say, as a little side note, maybe in addition to the list, that my stories, which is first this guy, The Half Theft, and then after that is Better Luck This Time. It's a sequel. They are definitely spooky fall reads, I would say. They're more thrillers, but they definitely have a creepy component to them, and I have had people kind of refer to them as horror stories, which I think is kind of funny because I never think of them as horror, really. But they definitely are spooky reads. They even take place in the fall. So, I mean, kind of the perfect story for you right now. It is this guy. It is, and listen, it's like a decently thick book. You're getting your money's worth. But I would definitely, 354 pages. I should know that about my own book, but I didn't. I did have to look. So if you're looking for something that's a little more thriller rather than horror, then I would definitely say check out The Half Theft. That might be right up your alley. It is young adult and also a thriller. So if you like either of those two things, that might be the perfect book for you. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in today. This has been my roundup of fall/spooky season/Halloweenish reads. Thank you so much for listening in. It is so fun making these videos for you guys, and I want to thank you so much for watching my first video. That meant a lot to me because it really did have more views than I was expecting, and your comments were so sweet, and I make sure to read every single comment and I reply to every single comment because you guys are just so nice and so supportive, and I love that. I absolutely adore that. So thank you so much, and if you've tuned into this video, thank you again. That is super exciting to me that some of you actually really enjoy watching these videos. I'm definitely going to keep making them because that is super cool, and I love being able to talk with you guys and interact with you guys. So definitely give this a like, drop a comment. I love to see your comments, and I will see you next time.